Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining so far. I'm gonna wait for next 5 to 6 minutes, waiting for other people to join and still getting requests from so many people. So give me like 5 to 6 minutes and then we'll start. Meanwhile, I would like to say hi to Jinny, Sheena, Sushanu, and to other people. Kajal, everyone is here. Hi Kalyan. And I also request everyone to please switch on your camera. I know it's very uncomfortable, but I insist. Great. Hi,
We're not
Naghma.
we're not gonna judge, right, Rekha?
Yeah,
So
we're not gonna judge. And we will not take picture without your consent. So yeah. Hi, Ashish.
Hi.
I I see a lot of people. Meanwhile, we are waiting for next 5 minutes. I would request everyone to just say hi with your name and from your organization, like which organization you are from, and your current location on chat. On chat. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you so much. I will start knowing that it's already 4:30 and we have a very limited time. Thank you everyone for joining. I would like to welcome everyone for this webinar, Making Collaborative Work. Just to give a heads up, this is CSIP, this year's first event, and I'm really glad about myself. My name is Rekha Rathore, and I work as a senior manager and student engagement lead with CSIP. It's almost 2 years, so I'm kind of excited about this webinar. I personally believe in collaboratives, and coming from a social sector background, I am happy, being part of this. I would request Krishanu. Krishanu is our new research director. So yay! Also, I know that I might have spammed your email with so many emails. Sorry for that. Starting this webinar with a quick start. Over to you, Kisano.
Hey, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining in. I welcome the participants, speaker, moderators, and everyone else who is here to, for the next really good couple of hours to talk about collaboratives. And I personally am super excited about this session. Rekha, obviously, is a brain behind this, setting this up. Rekha and Kajal, who is a part of our team. So thanks for them. Thanks to them to set this up. I just joined, so pardon any slippages on my part. Right? This is like still my first week. I joined as a head of research at CSIP right now, so I'm still learning the tricks and the different things that we do. So what I would do is actually take a few minutes first to give every one of you a sense of what you can expect from this session today. And then second, I'll give some background to the panel discussion that will be moderated by Jinny, who is the head and the center director for CSIP. And then there is a really exciting paper presentation that will come following that panel, the panel discussion, which will be led by Professor Kalyan V, who is already online. Thanks for that. And as you must have seen from the n number of emails that we have all received, today we are all about collaboratives. This is not something new. And the way that we will spend the next couple of hours is that there will be a panel discussion, maybe like somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes with all the speakers, and we'll keep about 10 minutes for Q&A. Now, I don't want everyone to keep their questions till the end, so please feel free to put all of your questions as and when you have them in your mind into the message box, and all of us will be actually tracking those questions and making a note of them, and then we'll take a few of them up when we end the whole panel session at the last 10 minutes or so. When you put in the question, a request is to just let us know who out of the three speakers or the moderator or anyone from the team you have a specific direct question to ask, or else you can just also keep it really broad. I think that also works for us. After that, I think we'll have about half an hour, 20-25 minutes or half an hour for the paper presentation and Q&A. And in that phase also, we'll follow the same protocol, right? So when the paper presentation is being done, if you have any question, and this time there's one author, so please feel free to directly put the questions in, and then we'll have a Q&A session after the paper presentation is over. Finally, I'll have some closing remarks, and we'll thank everyone, and then we'll end the session itself. So, just getting and setting the context for what we are going to expect from today's session. As you all know that we in India have had a long-standing tradition of a grassroots collaborative action, right? These started way back with the Chipko movement, and NGOs across India have actually organized since the 1990s to advocate for their rights. And an evolution of that has been recently documented by our CSIP research fellow, and we'll talk about that. The COVID-19 pandemic gave further impetus to this side of collaborations, and collaboratives are actually really something that has been spoken quite a bit in the past few years, I would say, both from the implementing agencies side and also from the philanthropist side. So this is something that on everyone's mind. And we have also seen in the past few years that there is a huge rise in the number of collaboratives. So I think the BizFan report actually talks about the exact numbers, and there is in the past 3 years, there's been a rise of fivefold, which is quite a bit. What runs parallel to this growth story is also that the journeys of these many collaboratives are varied, and some may have been really successful, but some may have failed and struggled. Why? We know a few of this, but we are today here to hear from the speakers who actually know much more about the collaboratives and the way that they work, and what lessons can we draw from there. I personally think that the challenge can be really structured in a way of a conundrum, right? Because on the face value of it, if you think about a collaborative, then you bring in multiple social sector actors. They are all motivated. They all want to do the same thing. They are working together to tackle chronic challenges, and they will, on paper, benefit from drawing on each other's resources, skills, and experiences. However, getting all of the institutions together, it can be challenging, right? Because bringing consensus together across multiple partners, negotiating a common framework, a commonality of languages, ensuring that everyone is incentivized in the same way. And that might lead to certain frictions on how to share credit, on how to actually also, graciously accept blames and so on and so forth. So so there is a trade-off, and we will talk about those trade-offs when we get into the session itself. Now, as you will see that we have a wide array of voices, not only in the audience, but also in the speakers. So there are philanthropists, there are practitioners, there are researchers, and together we want to explore the upside and downside of collaboratives. I don't claim that we'll have all the answers today, but the idea is to start the conversation and follow this up. And I have some thoughts on how to do this, which I'll share at the end of the session itself. Today we are looking for this in-depth discussion and really excited to bring in three different speakers. Our first, let's start with the funder perspective, which will be brought in by Naghma Mulla, who is right now obviously the CEO of Edelgate Foundation and is championing the Grow Fund. And for full disclosure, Naghma is also on the advisory council of CSIP, and we regularly rely on her for strategic directions and the path forward. We welcome Mr. Ashish Shrivastava for the practitioner perspective, and Ashish, apart from his regular role in running his NGO, he also participated in Reach Collaborative, which he will share more about. And this is obviously one of the pioneering collaboratives in India. And as an intermediary perspective, I would say Sheena Gandhi, who is right now with the Social Stock Exchange, and she's ex-Sahyog. So we'll also hear from her experience about running Sahyog as an intermediary of the collaboratives. And finally, we have our moderator, our own Jinny Uppal, who is head and center director for CSIP at the Ashoka University. Welcome, Jinny. Jinny obviously has a wide range of experiences in the past year, has been really focusing on relaunching and redrafting what CSIP actually stands for. And we look forward for more things from her this year. Thank you, everyone. I will rest here and then hand over to Jinny for starting off the panel presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for teeing us off, Krishanu and Rekha. I am hoping that you can hear me fine.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm very grateful to our panelists, Naghma, Sheena, Ashish, and Kalyan, for making time to share insights on a very interesting topic. We'll learn more about it, all of us collectively. And I want to thank our audience for making time late in the afternoon. My name is Jinny, as I've been introduced. So I'm the director and head for a Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy. We are India's first academic center affiliated with Ashoka University. I took on the role exactly a year ago yesterday. So I am going to stop calling myself new. I'm going to hand over the new baton to Krishanu, who joined us this week. Many of you have been following CSIP for quite a few years. We are coming on to 10 years of existence. And I want to acknowledge that it may have seemed like CSIP went on a hiatus for a couple of years. We sort of went silent. You didn't hear from us. That's going to change, of course, starting with this webinar. And you can expect more research, capacity building, and other programs in the weeks, months, and years to come. We are rebuilding the organization with new team members as well as a new strategy, and we'll be sharing that on our social channels. For now, I am looking forward. I've been looking forward for the topic of collaboratives. I was very fascinated by the paper that Kalyan wrote about it's a success story. So very often we have a success bias. We want to talk about stories that have succeeded. But I was curious to know there are some real challenges in putting collaboratives together. And for all the success stories, there are quite a few that didn't work out. So today's panel is really the dark side of collaboratives and what will it take to make them a success. Now, for the purpose of this discussion, we are distinguishing collaboratives from generic collaboration. So we are talking about organizational entities, either separately registered or not, where like-minded organizations or individuals come together for the stated objective. So that's what we mean when we talk about collaboratives. As Krishanu said, among NGOs, they have a long history. Chipko movement, Narmada Bachao, I'm going back decades. And so the NGOs have had their journey, they've had their successes, their failures. Among philanthropists, philanthropy is itself going through a new era in India over the last few decades. And so Indian philanthropist collaboratives are perhaps a little newish, but growing rapidly as per the Brisbane report that Krishanu mentioned. An opening question, Naghma, for you is, you championed the Grow Fund. It's been around for a little bit. It's still very much in the middle of, it's in the middle of its journey. As you were putting together the Grow Fund, tell us a little bit about it. What were your sources of inspiration and knowledge in designing and planning this collaborative to make sure that it is successful, and what would success look like for you?
Thank you. Thank you, Jinny, and thank you for inviting me for this conversation. To come straight to the point, there was no inspiration, there was just desperation. Because I mean, it was more than, I mean, now it's been more than a decade of observing very, very good intentions, very high energy, very high effort, sporadically succeed. And COVID was a miserable time for everyone in different ways. And for some of us who were in the thick of the relief mechanism and the funding that went on, the way generosity kind of poured in, what I was noticing as more and more funds were being raised was that even the most unexperienced givers and the most experienced givers were so razor sharp on what they wanted to fund. Like there was onions and potatoes and spoons and blankets, but somewhere in there was not even a cup of tea for people who are transporting it, no transportation costs. We would actually have some requests saying, we will not cover transportation costs, but we have all this stuff. And on the other hand, watching organizations who are just desperately focusing on relief and ensuring that there is a last mile reach happening, having to dip into their corpuses, having their sales and their staff actually work at no salary or at half salary. So it was the years of observation and seeing what was not really optimal in this sector. But at that point, it was really fairly sad that this is how we would think of providing relief. And so it came out of, honestly, the action. We had wanted to do it for a while, but COVID was like the perfect catalyst to ensure that we didn't think of consequences and just jumped in and said, okay, we're going to do this. And a collaborative effort to get funding for capacities of organizations and non-programmatic costs of organizations is very, very important. So at that point, really, that was the idea. Would you want to do this Q&A? Because otherwise I can just go on in a monologue.
Yeah. I mean, is this a time-bound collaborative? Like how have you designed it? Is it for X number of years?
Yes. So Grow is the first Grow is over. So it was never going to be a continuous process. So I have reports and I have evidence to prove that this works. So Grow was designed as a 2-year project, a 2-year funding for non-programmatic cost to 100 organizations that were chosen through the same parameters, open sourced, with as much as avoidance of human bias as needed. Now, critics may say that how can you have human bias removed from a process that is so humane, or is dealing with human crisis? The fact is that the big agenda for Grow was how do we reach out to as many organizations who don't usually get access to funds, usually get access to capacities, because typically it's the Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, and the neighbors who are able to access all of this. So our effort was, so in the design stage, we were very clear. We did 2 things in the design stage that I'm very, very proud of. One is that equal number of NGOs from North, South, East, West. So 100 will be shortlisted. What will the final look like? 25 from North, South, East, West. And with special focus on those states that we never see in collaboratives like, Nagaland, Assam, Kashmir, even Kerala for that matter. So those states. And the second thing that we said is that no sector more than 10%. So that immediately capped on the health and education. And then the fact is, so these 2 things gave rise to a very, very beautiful design that enabled a lot of diverse organizations to join in who we didn't know. And it also gave us a very big, shocking insight, is that when we opened up the applications, while there was there's a unanimous positivity from everyone, we did not see many applications in the beginning. So in the first week, we hardly saw any applications. And that was very perplexing because I was getting messages in thousands. Then how can the applications be so light? And we actually took 4-5 days of just calling up people and getting a sense check, and realized that no one really believed that this grant will happen. No. So organizations believe that nobody gives money for non-programs, so how can they ever get money for non-program? Organizations that were far away from the Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore piece, they actually thought that Bombay, a funder from Bombay would never give us, so why do we even try? Which is so heartbreaking. And thereby, and I will rest a little after this, that if for us that it was a huge moment of truth, that trust-based philanthropy, which most of us are very proud to engage in, is a two-way street. And as much as we say that we want to engage in trust-based philanthropy, we keep thinking about the trust with which we will give. But the fact is that trust is a two-way street, and it's not about us trusting the grassroots. The grassroots have to trust us with their vulnerabilities, with their problems, and with the work that they come from. So that actually defined almost everything that we did in the following years.
I'm curious, as you were designing, you must have thought of risks. You must have thought of this might not work and this might go bad. I'm guessing that you did not anticipate people wouldn't come. It sounds like that was a surprise.
Yeah.
But were there any risks that now when you look back, you're glad that you provided for those risks because you know that was the right thing to account for?
Yes. So see, the reason I was surprised that there were low applications in the beginning was, as a presumptuous funder, I had presumed that everybody would want grants for non-program, and it was my, I can now safely say it reeks of arrogance, right? That, okay, here is money, why wouldn't you want it? And
right.
it was a very good reality check for the Grow team, for me in particular, because I was like, okay, so there is much to be navigated, because we are coming with an intention that needs to be presented also in a certain way, and not that here is a grant and who would want it. So that was it. But in terms of risk, no, we had to actually put on our risk and financial management hats and think of the utmost risk. So the risks were provided for very strongly right from the front. The risk of compliance, the risk of, the weakest link would be the fall of all the 100. So how do we provide all the process? How do we organize processes in a way that all the 100 are compliant, are have got grants for what they really need, are able to respond to this kind of grant, have the capacity to manage financially, and are able to use it for the purpose that they want. So that was like the biggest risk, and we had to plan processes in a way that we have. So I have an analogy, which is like when you go to the airport and you get frisked, that you're not going to come out on the other side with things that shouldn't be coming out from the other side. But when you walk through a mall security, they might put their hands in your bags and they might check everything, but you can everyone of us knows you can pass anything through the mall security. So we didn't want mall security. We didn't want like 20 things, 20 documents and 20 details that would make us feel that there is lots happening, but we are full of risks. So we went after, we actually had a huge, a deliberation on what are the risks that are maximum, what are the documents that are absolute essentials, what are our non-negotiables. So we planned it really like a corporate mutual fund.
Got it. But it is still, the intention is this is still a bit time bound. In the sense you will renew it, you will extend it, but the idea is that this is for a certain amount of time for a stated objective, or is that not true?
No, we are not renewing. This was very clear right from the beginning. This is a non-program grant for 2 years.
Got it. Yeah.
And it is non-prescriptive in the way that in the non-programmatic grants, anything that is legal, that is allowed under the regulation of the land, you can spend it on. You don't have to ask our permission. You just have to report it back, because we were very keen to prove to the sector that when trust-based grant is actually given, it gives you back much more than you ever imagined.
Right,
so
right.
Our only thing was report. And we have some brilliant insights from the 8 quarters that we monitored this, and we're still monitoring it because we don't want to drop the ball on this. We want to see how this facilitation helps even in the long term.
Got it. So let's talk about just the objective, the time objective. One could argue that a collaborative by design should be for a stated objective. It should be accomplished over a period of time. Otherwise, you are just bleeding.
Yeah.
However, if you look at certain collaboratives, such as the one Kalyan is going to talk to us about, they have existed in perpetuity since the since the 90s is practically perpetuity. And NGO collaborators do have a history of being ongoing. FPOs and many other types tend to be ongoing. Ashish, if I can bring you in and ask you the question, this concept of collaboratives, is it best suited for a time-bound stated objective, or there are certain categories of problems which are really sticky where they just have to be in perpetuity? And what are the pros and cons of the two?
I mean, I think I mean, like Naghma said, it's very objective specific. So if the objective is a short-term objective, a lot of collaboratives that formed during COVID were very short-term workarounds. So then it's justified. But there are many issues which require long-term intervention. I mean, if we want to see sustainable change, we all know that sustainable change will only be possible if there is consistent quality intervention happening again and again. And so, I mean, for various issues, it takes time. It has to be happen in perpetuity. I mean, for example, I mean, the Reach Collective that I am part of, the whole idea behind uh, uh, having this collective was to bring out voices from the remote geographies. And what does change look at grassroots? No, ये problem तो हमेशा रहेगा. हम अभी फाउंडेशन लिटरेसी पे काम कर रहे हैं, कल को हम एआई पे काम कर रहे होंगे, लेकिन रिमोट ज्योग्राफीज हु आर डिस्टेंट in terms of access to power centers, access to resources, access to human capital. So how will we bring out those voices? How will we collaborate together? So I mean, for that, then in such cases, it's an eternal issue. Human trafficking. I mean, a lot of collectives in today's date. I mean, this whole Bihar, West Bengal, and Sikkim belt. There's a lot of collectives that has focused only on human trafficking, and
Yeah.
it is. I mean, it is a problem that is. So it depends. I think that what is the intention, what is the problem statement that you want to address.
Right. One of the risks of collaboratives is keeping everybody consistently engaged and aligned and staying on topic. And I don't know what your experience with Reach has been. When we were speaking a couple of weeks ago, you also talked about this, if it's a donor-funded collaborative or is it a organic, came from the grassroots. There are 2-3 different types of collaboratives, and there are pros and cons. What will make something last versus not last. Tell us a little bit about your views on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I as an organization, Shikshark is part of 6 collaboratives right now. One is a non-donor initiated collaborative, that is Reach India Collective. It came out of that hunger to be heard. We wanted to get heard. I mean, the collective has organizations in Kargil, in Assam, Manipur, Meghalaya. उनको मौका ही नहीं मिलता. वो साल में एक बार अगर दिल्ली आ गए किसी वर्कशॉप को अटेंड करने, तो वो उनका अचीवमेंट है. So वहां पे the hunger was the reason. Rest all collaboratives that I as an organization are part of are all funder driven. I mean Sheena is there in the call, and she was there since day one after we completed 1 year of the collaborative. And I mean I think if it wasn't for Sheena, the collaborative would not have existed because there was no funding available. So we were working without any funding. So finances was something that we were like, it was not even part of the agenda of the collective. पैसे आए, project आए, करेंगे, और आए भी हैं. I mean, as a collaborative, we have mobilized around 10 CR in the last 5 years. But वो goal नहीं है collective का. The goal is collaboration. So even if funding is coming, not coming, collaboration has to happen. So which was one of the non-negotiables was that you can only be part of Reach India Collaborative if you have been in practice of collaboration. So अगर आपने कभी collaborate किया नहीं है, तो आप उसका हिस्सा भी नहीं बन सकते. But then there are other collectives which are again funder driven. So वो बहुत project specific. I mean, I'm part of one collaborative in Jharkhand, and there is one in Odisha. Then they're very project driven. वो project जब तक है, तब तक वो collaborative रहेगा, तब तक. But then I think, I mean, that is fair as well, because again, as I said, it's a objective driven. I mean, you want to show some impact. For Reach India Collective, it's the voice and the narrative that is important. for the time-bound funder-driven collectives, it's the opportunity to create that impact is important. So
Yeah. And you mentioned Sheena, and Sheena, your perspective I thought would be so interesting because you were running an intermediary, if I may call it that, called Sahyog. And the purpose there was to help get these collaboratives defined and off the ground. So you've seen your share. You've seen your share of successful collaboratives and those that either never took off the ground or they took off the ground and didn't reach their objective. Tell us a little bit about your journey. What are the biggest pitfalls, landmines that one doesn't realize before they start getting into the world of collaboratives? What is it that the rest of us can learn from your experience?
Thanks, Jinny. Great to be on the panel, and thank you for inviting me. I know I'm in a totally different avatar now, but collaboration.
You've been reborn now
Yeah,
on the social stock
collaboration's been a
exchange,
very close close to my heart. Let me put it that way, and I
Yeah.
try and infuse it everywhere we can. I always believe collaboratives are iterative and learning processes, right? Yes, you may start with a particular objective, okay, but the problems also keep changing. And just since Ashish is here and we started, when they came to me, came to us at Sahyog, they came to us with saying, "Humne kaam to kiya tha COVID mein, and but we want to continue doing this, but we don't know how to." And I think that was, in all honesty, the most honest thing I have heard from not-for-profit leaders. A lot of them will not acknowledge that they don't know how to do it, okay? And they need someone to sort of be able to show it. Everybody believes, and I do believe, that collaboration, Lanza, is in everybody in the social sector's DNA. But I think we're so sometimes taken up by funders, where the funder's giving money. What do we want to do with the money? We'll come together if the funder's giving us money. And Ashish himself will tell you he's part of collaboratives where there are funder-driven. But we tried at least 5, okay, collaborators in the 3-4 years that after COVID, and all failed except for one. And it failed, I mean, from a long-term sustainability. It's not that the issue disappeared. It was that they were not willing to put in that time and cost and energy, which again comes really back to operational capacities, right? And time is money. Yeah, we are all working on those budgets where 90% of those budgets are going towards programs. So we don't and everybody's fundraising. So it's very little time. I think the other is trust. Okay, we don't trust. I think Naghma also spoke about it. If you want a credible partner, or you want 5 different credible partners, you have to build the trust. You may want to partner with a friend, okay, but at the end of the day, when you have to really work on programs that are extremely close to your heart and that you're emotionally and passionate about, friends goes out the window. It's really what you sort of bring to the table, right? And that's where a lot of the work that Sahyog tried to do was to sort of try and formalize it. I'll give you an example. When Ashish and all came, I think there were 21 organizations that came together to say, we want to work together. These are remote and rural organizations across India, working in primarily education. And what we structured for them was a rolling governance board, to say it isn't about this one person that's driving it, okay? But it's really about everybody getting that voice to be heard. And again, it's very customized to what Reach has. I don't think it will work for another collaborative. And I think whosoever is sort of anchoring or helping them sort of needs to be able to build those in. Time is a huge problem. Okay, there is very little that you can do, or people is the other one. People don't know. If you don't talk from a leadership standpoint, it's always a very top-down approach. Acha, I went for this meeting. Now the person that is working on the ground should go and do it. Collaboration needs to be a culture. which is very, very far from what is existing. I think we all in boardrooms and everywhere, we talk about this, yes, we should all collaborate and we all meet at conferences, but does it really, your program lead, is she or he actually doing it? And they're doing it in the communities. So it's just about really being able to talk about those pieces that nobody really puts that much attention to, but they speak volumes. And
Right.
and I think just one last one, from a landmine perspective, is really, I mentioned this earlier, they don't know who to partner with. Do they need the same skill sets? Do they need people with different domain knowledge? So it's really a jigsaw puzzle, okay, that you've got to find your perfect sort of, it's never perfect, but at least at that time frame, what really fits. And that, yes, it's an iterative process. It will change in about a year's time. So I'm going to pause there.
Yeah. No, I think what I'm taking away from you is the summary that I'm hearing is what makes a collaborative not succeed or live up to its potential is lack of trust and execution, which can include operational capabilities, governance, which interestingly is also a reason why any organization might fail. It's never the lack of the opportunity or the problem statement. And so the corollary, then, that my follow-up question, which is really for Naghma and Ashish, is: are collaboratives best created organically, DIY, by the organizations, or is there room for a third party, an intermediary, such as Sahyog? In many ways, CSIP is also an intermediary. We are not an NGO. We are here to provide capabilities and competencies to NGOs so that they can become successful. So in the world of collaboratives, is there room for an intermediary, or is it best if they, because I could argue collaboratives is composed of many people who have collectively, maybe they have the knowledge. So Naghma, for you, starting with you from the philanthropist perspective, is there room for intermediary to facilitate collaboratives that are meaningful, or is it best done by the philanthropist, figure it out how to do it?
Okay, so I may say something that may sound a little harsh, but see, the collaboratives, forget the non-profit or the corporate world. Collaboratives are not endeavors or efforts that come because good people want to do good things. Whether it's in the corporate world or whether it's in philanthropy or whether it's anywhere, collaborations happen when people want to do something and they find it more lucrative, the chances of successes are high when we work with someone else to get it done. Now, in the corporate world, it is more simpler because we all have a common goal of profit. There is turnover, there's profit, there's bottom line. There is a common goal, and therefore, whether we like each other or not, whether we trust each other or not, whether we would want to stay in the same room or not, we collaborate because there is a common goal that is bigger than all of us. And we don't have to have everybody, we don't have to have consensus for it. We just need a mandate, and we need a common.
I think someone else is speaking. Yes. Sorry, please, Naghma, go ahead.
Yeah. So that is it. So when we talk about collaboratives, the non-profit, one is, I don't believe that it is fluid, and there's two parts to collaborative. One is the intention, the desire, the rigor, the josh with which everybody comes up and wants to do, and the other is the practicality of getting things done, which is even having efficient meetings, the operationality of everything. I feel that this is my thinking, that in the non-profit world, first hurdle is that we want different things even from the different communities. Many of us fall in the God complex, which is that I know what you want, and I don't need to check in with you about what you want. And depending on who I am, I will have my agenda in the collaborative. It's human. It is there, and it goes unchecked because we all believe we are coming with better intentions than our partners. So that is a real thing. But while all of that could have been mitigated, where the development sector really struggles is because our operations are not organized the way large collaboratives need to be having organized. And that is because our resources are lacking. The right talent for that operation is lacking. It's more nuts and bolts. It's actually a simpler problem to solve if we can separate the rigor, the josh, the intention from the fact that we just simply need to get our work done. If just to organize 5 partner meetings, I need to have an approved budget, which ranges between 50,000 and 55,000, and have an argument for 2 hours, negotiated with the funder. By the time we get in the same room, we have logistically overwhelmed ourselves to then say, okay, in this 1 hour, we have to solve 5 problems, and that's not going to happen. So with that, when you think of the problem of, the question of whether intermediaries are a welcome part of it or not, is there room for it or not? Yes, somebody's got to pay for it. Okay, the important thing in a collaborative, the 2 important things without which nothing will happen, is somebody's got to pay for it. And somebody's got to want it more than everybody else. And they both can be different people. But if they're not there, we're just going to have a large group of people who have many desires, but no work gets done.
Intermediary. So I think what I'm hearing you say is everybody's got to have skin in the game, but somebody's got to have so much passion that they will not let it fail. They'll figure out a way to keep the whole thing going. And that person presumably has their own organization to run. Like, is it something that somebody just steps up, or you get outside help?
Look at, for example, look at Jan Sahas. Jan Sahas was a smaller organization. Okay, it wanted the migrant resilience collaborative so badly. The kind of things Ashif has done to get the right group together involves such high desire that you are willing to accept that you're not good at everything, and you need partners with alternative skills, and many things you will have to listen to those partners. You have to be welcome to. So it's not about being a funder or about being a grantee or a non-profit. See, one thing is that somebody has to want it more than anything else in the world. The second thing is and that person will have to realize that they alone cannot get anything done. You need alternative skills. And that is that. So at one point you are thinking, I want something so much that I'm going to fight the world for it. And then the next step is to actually let go of power and say, I want it so much that I don't mind letting go of power. Now that is humanly a big point of conflict. And this is where I start worrying about the fact that we bracket it as a development sector problem. And not a problem of the fact that there are limited resources. The problem is bigger than us, and there is power in the room that is disproportionate. So these are real problems here. The problem is not that the non-profit sector cannot organize itself, or that philanthropists are ruling why are philanthropists having a larger voice? Because they have the resource. But if Jan Sahas has proved that, you can have many, many philanthropists on the other side, but if you want something more than they want it, then they're going to listen to you. So, and again, all my statements are not sweeping statements. These are generic. Of course, people have defied everything, but I think this is my observation over the last many years.
Yeah. So in addition to what Sheena talked about, trust execution, someone's got to really want it. Someone's got to have just non-negotiable passion. We're going to do it. So we'll add that into the mix of what it takes to make a successful collaborative. Ashish, from your perspective, the role of intermediaries, nice to have or mission critical?
It's a must, and I think with how the definitions and understanding of collectives is evolving, we should have board of advisors as well. In fact, in our last collective meeting we had in Jan early in 2024, and we had invited Jasmeet, I can see her on the call, and then Ravi Gulati, and there were other folks, and we were discussing should we have a board of advisors. So intermediary is important, and I think I mean my reason for why it is important is in addition to what Naghma said, the operational ability is something, but then more than that, we all as organizations are for many years have got into the habit of competition and not collaboration. So there is always that fear of losing individual identity, and that willingness to lose that individual identity for the collective identity. It cannot happen on its own. I mean, there will be some intermediary, somebody who is neutral, who is bringing back all the discussion, self-obsessed discussion back to the larger vision is important. So that is a must. And I think, I mean, at that, and it also, and along with intermediary, I think what Naghma just said, again, somebody has to own it, somebody has to anchor it initially. वो मैं उसको रेलगाड़ी वाला एग्जांपल है, वो आप बोगी कितनी भी जोड़ दो, 2 या 3 इंजन तो आपको लगेंगे ही लगेंगे। वो 2 या 3 इंजन कौन है वो डिफाइन करना पड़ेगा। And I think that, and these will be the people, I think, who believe. So there are two kind of belief systems that I find in development sector. One belief system is me growing is equivalent to ecosystem growing. और जो दूसरा बिलीफ सिस्टम है जिसको मैं सर्राफा बाजार वाला मॉडल बोलता हूँ कि द इकोसिस्टम ग्रोइंग इज एवरीबॉडी ग्रोइंग. So for the people who believe in the ecosystem growth will be the ones who will be acting as anchors or intermediary.
Interesting. Yeah. So Naghma sees room for intermediaries. You are saying it's absolutely required. Sheena, why are there not more intermediaries? I don't hear of very many. And Sahyog isn't around now. So why aren't there more of these?
Well, funding for it is minuscule at best. Yes. There are certain funders that, of course, have and drive their collaborations on their objectives and what they are more aligned to, and fair enough for that. I think you don't need an organization to be an intermediary. I think a role it's a facilitator's role, but I think it's really about bringing people together, well-meaning people. And like Ashish was talking about engine, you need a backbone. And it doesn't need to be an organization. It's really, I think we helped them for about a year. And with the objective, when we signed up, was we don't want any financial. It was something that we were willing to do. Intermediaries won't work for free. I mean, that's at the end of the day, why should anybody work for free is what I feel, right? And at the end of the day, Ashish and all from Reach decided, they said, you help us set it up, and after that, we will take it forward. And it's still alive. So there is, I think it's in the initial stages where a lot of it really bridging needs to be done, where a lot of facilitation needs to be done. It's a lot of doing quick win activities to say, will this work? Can we find it in our, can we find it that we are all working towards a certain goal together? They all worked in smaller groups, smaller working groups. Some of them raised money and they all did it. We told them very clearly, I will not do fundraising for you. This has to be driven by you. And that ownership, right? Of course, there were leads, okay, but eventually it's the ownership of the group. Why? The reason why I'm talking here is because Ashish is live here, and it's great. And I think I've followed the Jansahas very closely, and I think what they've been able to do is phenomenal. There's also the Catalyst one, which is just came out of COVID, and then sort of just replicated, created smaller groups. So a lot of very health focused and health driven, but as a result of COVID, so some very good things came out of COVID, but COVID, a lot of things died after COVID as well. So the guys who were really driven in the belief system of collaboration continued. And I think it really gave a great impetus with the funding community. And I think a lot of them sort of really came together. If I was reading the Bain philanthropy report, I think last year's, I think they're going to launch another one now. And in the past, they've seen in the past about 3 years, the number of collaborations have just sort of tripled. And so everybody's really trying to, there's a Bihar Development Collective. They also do some phenomenal work. So it's just really, it's community. You can be as low as at the grassroots level and be as high at a very ecosystem level. Collaboration should ideally happen at multiple levels. And I think you should be able to tap into funders that are willing to support you. Some low risk funders may want to just do some stuff which is geographical, and it's not that the need is not there. It is for you to figure out which solution sort of fits you, whether it's from a funding standpoint or from a problematic standpoint.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Thank you, Sheena. I do want to pause and see if there are any questions. Krishanu, Rekha, is there anything I've missed? If not, I have another question to ask.
Okay.
Well,
Sorry. We have few comments and we have few thoughts on the chat which I would like to take. I think I'll go back to the chat.
yeah, there's one question around, are there any role models outside of India that you follow in terms of, what a good collaborative looks like? I mean, do you look into that? Any of the panelists, if you can answer.
So I'm not aware of collectives as such, but yeah, there are a lot of networks that are there globally around working around different themes. And now, even now, in the last 4 5 years, these networks have started taking up the shape of collectives as well, where they're kind of doing work together, sharing resources. So like one that I'm part of is INEE, International Network for Education in Emergencies. So it's again a global network. They have chapters across, and then Catalyst is something that Sheena mentioned. Then around women, and then there is something that on the theme of menstrual hygiene and well-being of women. I mean, in fact, Uninhibited India is kind of anchor member for that collective. So yeah, there are few. But again, I mean, I think most of that is very funder driven.
Got it. There were a couple of questions about, how the Grow Fund was, what the grants are. For that, I recommend just, look at their website. The information is all there. Were there any other questions? Rekha, Krishanu?
So I think that there was one interesting question which maybe one of the panelists can look into, which is that what exactly, like how does a collaborative actually make a collective or democratic decision, right? Like, because there are so many people. Now, what is exactly the decision making process? And my guess is that whoever put this question, thank you, is that becomes like one of the points of conflict, right? That if no one is making a decision, then is everyone making a decision? And then how does that play out? And I'm guessing that it also plays into...
Is it a democracy, autocracy, or a partial democracy? So Ashish, how does that work for you?
So I can give two examples that I'm part of. One is Reach India Collective. Reach India Collective, what Sheena mentioned, a roster kind of system. So there's an anchor committee. 6 members from the organizations who are partner over the net member organizations. 6 people are formed for a part of the anchor committee, and every 6 months, 3 people will leave and new 3 people will come in. So that rotation keeps happening. And then there are certain criteria for who will be additional members of the collaborative. So we have laid down those criteria. Another example has been something that I've been part of in Jharkhand. Jharkhand has a SCL collective called Sampurna, and it is being facilitated by Ashraf and Arjun and Minu from the Prava and Kamintini. I mean, they call it Adatatva now, and I think they're one of the best people to facilitate such spaces and collectives. I mean, obviously, Vartalip is something that they have created and have been moderating. So over there, a lot of facilitation happens to bring in consensus. So we meet twice or thrice in a year, 3 days का एक residential setup में रहते हैं. A lot of brainstorming happen, groups, and then ensuring that how everybody is getting that space to share, to be heard, and then bringing in that consensus. So एक वो approach है, एक anchor committee वाला approach है. People nominate, select their representatives, and then they mostly take the call on what should be the strategy.
Right, right. And Naghma, what have you seen? What works? Decision making.
See, in our experience, the decision making, whatever we decide, is best that it is defined before people walk into the room and not after. So the governance structure, the decision making matrix is designed before we have funders and before we have. So that also prevents for cherry picking of responsibilities and cherry picking of rights. So that becomes easy. What we do, see, the funds that the collaboratives that Edelgive has, we are very clear that the collaboratives have to also protect the integrity and sovereignty of the grassroots. So for us, we will not be intruding on their operation, as in on their performance on their programs. So they have complete control on their programmatic, programmatic leaning. That's also for the individual projects that Edelgive funds. We are very clear that if we've partnered with them, it means that their programs are kosher and we don't want to in any way alter. The collaboratives Edelgive also has is we are not going after one program executed by many organizations. It is every organization doing what they know how to do best and we getting them in together on the operative scale. So it becomes very important that people who are in decision-making positions in the different tiers are people who understand compliance. They understand, the organizing management. And that is, again, it's not decided that if there's a large funder, we'll have 2 people from there. Nothing like that. That structure is created before we have any kind of funder or any kind of grassroots in the. And in the selection of Grow, for example, we decided that we also need to neutralize Edelgive bias. Because, then otherwise we become the problem that we are saying exists. So in the shortlisting of 355 applications down to 100, once it came, once the logic was applied and shortlist came down to 600, then we actually had 16 experts from different places who would have no stake in the performance of Grow.
Wow.
To come and guide us into the selection process and how it goes. So the decision, the matrix is made to ensure that the decision makers are not benefited by the results of the decisions.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from both of you is it doesn't matter how you make the decision, but know what the methodology or the process of decision making is going to be and build mechanisms to at least reduce undue influence or bias. And again, you can, I think, reduce, you cannot eliminate, like things can still go wrong. But the best thing you can do is have a structure that this is how decisions will be made. This is how we'll account for biases, undue influences. So great. I have one, I think it's the last question, then we have to switch to Kalyan. Should governments have a role to play at all in collaboratives, or are these best left to private actors and government becomes, you may still collaborate with the government, but I'm talking about now collaborative as an entity. Should the government be part of it or just best left outside of it?
This is to who?
Naghma, go. Your perspective.
Maharashtra, the principal secretary of the Education Department of Maharashtra has been a part of our collaborative for 8 years now. Our education project that's now working with the State Department is it's been an 8-year association. It was a predetermined 10 years for which we had come together to get a certain number of things done. And there was a very clear understanding of what Edelgive would do and what the government would expect from us and what we would expect from the government. I am in no way saying that everything is a smooth ride, but one is see, the government is in itself, it's not a monolith, right? It's made of people, different
departments. Yep.
Yeah. So the fact is that there are many good people even in the government structures. And if we are able to anchor into people who have good power and good intentions, then it is actually something that enables it has a multiplier force, right? Because the government engaged with us in the pre-planning stages as well. We were able to move to serving schools, that were catering to more than 1.5 million children in the third year itself. Now that on our own, no matter how many funders come in, would have been impossible for us. So it's not, again, a yes and no answer. Should the government be a part of collaboratives? Of course. But the cost of it, the ability to manage that power, the ability to negotiate with them, and some things, some mandates, again, it's also mandate dependent, because some mandates need the civil society to bind together without the government involved, and some mandates need the government involvement. So we cannot, it's not a yes and no or a black and white answer, as much as it is that if needed, then there need to be good ways to have them participate in a way that takes the mandate forward.
And Ashish, your perspective?
I mean, I think everybody should be part of a collective. मेरा मानना है कि जिसकी कहानी उसकी जुबानी. सो अगर सरकार के साथ काम करना है तो वो भी होने चाहिए. अगर कम्युनिटी जो हमारे टारगेट ग्रुप है, अगर बच्चों के साथ काम कर रहे हैं, महिलाओं के साथ काम करने चाहिए, तो वो भी होने चाहिए जब कलेक्टिव की ब्रेनस्टॉर्मिंग हो रही है. सो आई एम अ स्ट्रॉन्ग बिलीवर इन दैट, and I've seen few examples of how it has worked. The Punjab Education Collective, which Mantra for Change and Sanji Sikhya, they are a classic example of how they've built the whole collective together. They curated the collective along with the government. There's something right now that we are part of is Odisha Collective, a group of 6 organizations. Now, both Punjab Collective and Odisha Collective are not funder-driven collective, but they're opportunity-driven collective. So we have a government system who is saying we want to do these things, and can we work together? So, I mean, it's an opportunity-driven collective, but yeah, I mean, it's a win-win situation. There's one interesting example which didn't succeed, but it was a very courageous exercise that happened in Chhattisgarh. An IS officer who became the Secretary of Education, he formed a collective of organizations and consulting groups in Chhattisgarh. He said, "This is the vision of the government. This is where we were, and now you tell us where you want to play that role." And they formed a collective. It worked for 6 months, 7 months. He got transferred, and yeah, अभी तो वो इतिहास है. लेकिन that was a very courageous thing where government took the initiative to form a collective.
Right. So a donor initiated, government initiated. It doesn't matter who starts. It's just a matter of having the right passion and the right operating model. Which sounds like any organization. You just have to have the right structure. Awesome. Thank you. I know we could go on for hours on this topic. We could mine your brains for a lot of information, but I think we should stop. And if we have missed any questions, I apologize. These conversations have a way of getting very interesting, so it's hard to just go through all of the questions. But I want to sincerely thank Ashish, Naghma, Sheena. Thank you so much for making time and sharing so freely and candidly. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot for the conversation.
Excellent. I think I'm handing it back to Krishanu for the next segment of this webinar.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I mean, I think it was really enlightening, and people participated quite a lot. So that's a marker of great conversation flowing. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news and switching to the next section, which I actually believe is equally interesting and will be equally enlightening. I welcome Professor V. Kalyan Shankar. He is an associate professor at the Symbiosis School of Economics in Pune, and he has got his PhD from the Department of Economics from the University of Pune only, and was also a Fulbright Nehru's postdoctoral fellow at the India-China Institute at the New School in New York City, and obviously has a bunch of other accolades, including the Elizabeth Adishisha Award for contributions to development studies by an Indian national below 45 years of age. Now, Professor Kalyan Shankar has definitely been associated with CSIP for quite some time, especially around as a research fellow, and he has a great paper out in the working paper series with CSIP, which also has other papers. And I'll briefly introduce the paper and then let Professor roll with this. So the focus of the paper that he will discuss today is on sex workers, who were obviously one of the segments of informal labor who were worst affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, because there were restrictions to mobility and then were really intense surveillance of the community. However, against this backdrop, and now that we have all established a lot of facts and understanding about collaboratives, the collaborative of the National Network of Sex Workers, they played an important role in fundraising and assisting member organizations and affiliated sex workers through the pandemic itself. Now I'll leave it to Professor Kalyan Shankar to take on. I'm sure that you have a presentation to get to the paper, what have you learned, and then again, like a quick ground rule, I think we'll go on for probably 20-25 minutes, if not more. And everyone else who has a question on this particular research paper that Professor Kalyani is going to present, please feel free to put your questions on the chat, and we'll collate and then use it as a part of the Q&A, which will follow the paper presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Am I audible? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let me just share a presentation that I have. Yes. Is this visible? Yeah. Okay, so to begin with, let me thank everyone at CSIP for having me here as part of this very interesting panel, and let me thank Jinny and Krishanu for all the discussions over the past year or so over different aspects of this work. Now, the work that I was associated with while being a CSIP fellow dealt with this very topic of COVID-19, sex workers, and survival, and how did the National Network of Sex Workers support member organizations through the pandemic. Now, just to give you a little background to the study here, and from a very early point within the pandemic, sex workers were identified as a high-risk group in the spread of COVID-19. And in a way, it was a sense of deja vu for them because they were subject to the very same kind of stigmatization that they had experienced almost 30 years ago during the onset of of the HIV pandemic. Right? So there were restrictions in terms of mobility for them. So a lot of the red light areas continue to remain cordoned off even as restrictions were getting eased in other parts of the country. So there were restrictions on mobility, restrictions on movement of clientele, and this affected incomes for sex workers for a fairly substantial period of 2020, 21, and 22. So there were also some very alarming reports about sex workers getting into debt bondage because of this lack of incomes. But there was very little information on how sex workers survived the pandemic, basically, and what kind of support did they receive from sex worker organizations which worked with them behind the scenes. What was the nature of support that was offered to them? There was absolutely very little information coming in from that side of the story. So in my research just tried to make this a bit more symmetric in nature and try to fill in this gap. And for this purpose, I drew upon the work which was done through the National Network of Sex Workers for supporting member organizations. Now, it's not a small organization by any means because the National Network comprises presently of around 70 odd organizations which are operating across 10 states now, and collectively they have membership of almost close to
Professor, sorry to jump in. Can you please put the presentation on a full screen mode? I think a few people are not able to just view it. Yeah, thank you. But please continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, where was I? So, the National Network of Sex Workers is a fairly large organization. It has over 70 odd community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, which are members of this network now. And collectively, they have a strength of almost close to 100,000 sex workers. So it's a fairly large network, and it has grown over the years. Now, my work as well as my presentation is structured in three parts here. So firstly, I'll be talking a bit about how can we map this terrain of organizations which have been associated with sex workers? How have they evolved? How do we build some kind of a typology of this? And within this, we can then move on to start thinking about where do we place the role of networks, the informal networks, the formalized networks. Secondly, I would run you through the sort of genealogy of the national network. How has it evolved over the past 30 odd years now, close to 25 years. And having given you this background, then I would discuss a bit about what was the specific nature of support that the National Network of Sex Workers was able to provide for the member organizations. And also the number of member organizations has been growing post-COVID-19, which is also sort of reflective of the relative successes of the approaches that have been taken by the network. Now, to begin with, the collectivization of sex workers in India has charted a journey which is very independent of the women's movements. So the onset of HIV becomes the starting point for understanding more about how sex worker organizations have evolved in India. So we have sex worker movements in India starting from around the 1980s onwards. You have the emergence of sex worker organizations, community-based organizations, and non-governmental organizations working with sex workers. Uh, Now, how do we sort of map across this terrain? And for this purpose, I've just used a couple of very key parameters on the basis of which the organizations have been functioning. Firstly, if we look at the rules of their operation, are they formal or informal in nature? And on the other hand, what are these units of collectivization here? So are they individuals who are coming together, or are they organizations which are coming together? So based on these two parameters, I have built this matrix which can actually get used for any kind of space of civil society that way. So when we are talking about something like the National Network of Sex Workers, it would fit into column 4 of this matrix because it's a formalized registered network, right? But you could have other organizations which, or other groupings which would fit in other segments of this matrix. So you could have some of the early social movements or sex worker movements which are completely informal in nature, and you would place them as part of group 1. And from the folds of those social movements, you have the emergence of very specific organizations which have registered themselves. So organizations like, say, Sangram, for instance, or DMSC in Calcutta. These are all organizations which have a long history of being part of the women's movements. They have split from the women's movements. They have created their own space. They have advocated for sex workers' rights. And at some point of time, they've thought that it would be far more prudent for them to actually get formalized. And which is where then the rules of operations then don't remain those self-imposed constraints that they have created for themselves, but rather you have these organizations falling within whatever governmental set of regulations have been put in place. Now, beyond this, then it becomes a question of how do these organizations start interacting with each other, and which is where then we have the third column of the matrix, where you start building issue-based alliances or coalitions. So in the context of sex work, we tend to find that a lot of these early networks were largely advocacy-based networks. So you had organizations which were operating in different parts of India, which started coming together for advocacy with the state for some very specific purposes. Say, for example, there's a new law or a new bill which is getting proposed by the government. So all of these organizations would come together to understand what could be the implications of it for the specific organizations or for sex workers at large. And that's how these issue-based coalitions or alliances started coming together. Now, from here, you start finding a case of some of these alliances actually going ahead to formalize themselves. So you have several formalized, registered networks of organizations working with sex workers today, and I'll talk a bit more about that going forward. So this matrix, in a way, enables us to place where are we positioned vis-a-vis any kind of issue or any kind of activity, right? And as we move from, so the matrix also provides us with some kind of a continuum of organizational structures. So you could move from column 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. In some cases, you could have that transition not happening fully. So you could move from 1 to 2 to 3. So you remain at that state of informal, loosely organized network, but you don't formalize yourself. Right? So there are different ways to look at this matrix. Now, coming to the question of the nationalized, the national network of sex workers, just to provide you a genealogy of the organization here. So way back in 1997, in November 97, you have for the first time, you have a national conference of sex workers, which was held in Calcutta. Prior to this, you already have the emergence of quite a few of the organizations working with sex workers, and they have all emerged because of the the intervention of the government, again, for the purpose of targeted intervention in preventing the spread of HIV. So that becomes the context for the emergence of organizations. So you have NACO, which is supporting a lot of these organizations. So you have community-based organizations, which are getting supported by some of the global philanthropic organizations. And you do find that the terrain is already getting mapped to some extent. But there was no real networking across them. So for the first time in 97, you have this National Conference of Sex Workers, which is attended by almost close to 4,000 sex workers. And this is where, for the first time, you have a proposal coming through that perhaps there is a need for a national network of sex workers to come through. And there's already a precedent globally for this, because you have the Asia Pacific network of sex workers, which had been created in 94, 95, if I'm not wrong. And that became the precedent to follow. And in 98, we have the formation of the National Network of Sex Workers, which is nothing but this sort of informal alliance, which is which comes together for advocating sex workers' rights. And I have mentioned the names of some of the founder members here. They include the Darbar Mahila Samanvay Committee, which is located in Calcutta and based out of Sonagachi. That is one of the prominent sex worker organizations advocating for sex workers' rights and decriminalization of sex work. There is WAMP, which is based out of Sangli. There is Me and My World, Vadamalar Federation, Saheli, Karnataka Sex Workers Union, which is also associated with, which has a sister concern called as Sangama. And the Uttar Karnataka Mahila Okkuta, which is the already an alliance of sex worker organizations existing in the northern districts of Karnataka. So when we look at the journey of the National Network of Sex Workers, there are these three key phases to look at here. So from 1998 to 2010, the group works largely for the purpose of advocacy. So each of these organizations then retain their own terrains of operations, and wherever there is a need, then they come together, largely for advocacy purposes or for supporting any organization locally which has got affected because of state intervention. Right. So the prime work which the national network was associated with during this time period was to voice concerns against the raid, rescue, and rehabilitation model of intervention by the anti-trafficking groups. Now, a good example of this was what happened in Goa, where there's the Baina red light area, which was completely demolished, and therefore all of the sex workers from that region had to be got scattered, and therefore something had to be done to rehabilitate them. And this is where the National Network of Sex Workers came together to support the women who had lost their livelihoods over there. Now, the real watershed moment for NNSW comes about in 2010, where a group of very key members of the organization, including DMSC, the Calcutta-based one, and some of the other associated organizations move out of NNSW, and they go on to form the All India Network of Sex Workers. Now, interestingly, in 2011, we have the All India Network of Sex Workers already going on to register itself formally. So here we have a split within the organization wherein a part of them are already going down that formalization route, and there is the ones who are left behind continue to remain in that informal mode of operations, or they remain this loosely organized network of sex workers. And having formalized, you have All India Network of Sex Workers already starting to receive funding, if I'm not wrong, from UNFP. And that became one of the factors of consideration, that unless you do get formalized, you can't really bid for funding on a larger scale. And that became one of the points of discussion within the National Network of Sex Workers. And from this time period between 2011 to 2020, we have these deliberations happening within the national network in terms of how do we go ahead and register, whether we need to do it or not. And if at all we do that, then who is going to be the lead organizations within this space, right? And it took them a space of almost 8 to 10 years to arrive at this consensus on formalizing of the national network. And in 2020, just prior to the onset of COVID-19, the network goes on to register itself as an NGO. Now, this is just to give you a mapping of how the number of member organizations have increased within NSW sub post its formalization. So from 22 member organizations in 1920, they have grown to 72 in 22-23. Now, given this backdrop, the question is, how did the national network, now that it is formalized in nature, how did it tap into different kinds of funding sources for supporting member organizations? So here we find a 4-tier kind of approach for raising funds by the NSW. So at tier 1, we have NSW engaging through other partners, of course, with the Global Fund for to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, GFATM, or the Global Fund as it's commonly referred. So here, NSW partnered with other organizations which are working with key populations of HIV, and collectively they were able to put across this proposal for funding. Then we move to the second tier of funding, where NSW lies with central or state governments, and there was this advocacy with the National Human Rights Commission for including sex workers within the category of vulnerable groups which needs state funding or which needs state support. And particularly in case of certain state governments, you have that funding coming through. Particularly Maharashtra is a good case to understand this. And then thirdly, you have the tapping of funding from philanthropic organizations, CSR organizations, or making use of local networks or connections therein. And largely trying to raise crowdfunding. So these are the 4 tiers of funding sources that the NSW looks at during the pandemic. Now, to begin with, if we were to look at NSW and the GFATM funding, so quite early into the pandemic, we have all of the networks of key populations living with HIV for the first time coming together and approaching GFATM. So this was quite unprecedented in many ways, because all of these networks used to operate independently prior to this. So COVID-19 provides them the context to come together and approach the GFATM for a larger funding here. And secondly, it's also unprecedented in the sense that the GFATM historically has adopted what is called as a country coordination mechanism. So they don't really address requests for funding coming through directly from the organizations. So the idea is that the organizations approach their respective governments, and the governments are the ones who would then take up the matter further with GFATM. So given the emergency nature of funding needed during COVID-19, during the early period of COVID-19, so it's unprecedented that you have GFATM actually acquiescing that there is a need for funding here and trying to approve of this in principle. And there was an approval of around close to USD 10 million, which came through from GFATM for all of the networks put together. Okay? And this funding was expected to be distributed by the respective networks under 2 headings. So firstly, across all of the individual networks, 10% of the money was to be utilized for food distribution kits. And secondly, 90% of that money was to be utilized for direct cash transfer, which was a one-time transfer of approximately 1,500 rupees. Okay. Now, the problem that emerged out of this was that there was very poor utilization of this money, and only around $2 million could be utilized by all of the networks put together. And particularly in the case of NSW, out of all of the 95,000 members, only 729, less than 1,000 people actually received this one-time cash transfer. And NSW was not unique in this case, because if you look at this this chart here, you realize that all of the other networks, so except for the All India Network of Sex Workers, had very poor utilization of the money coming through from GFATM. So less than 10%, in some cases, even less than 1% of the money was utilized here. The reason for this is that none of these organizations had put in place the documentary compliances which was expected by GFATM. So none of the members had any kind of records already in place vis-a-vis the bank details or the Aadhaar details of their respective members. Okay. Whereas in case of DMSC, even within the All India Network of Sex Workers, it's only the DMSC which had that kind of a information prior hand, because we also have an internal bank in the form of the Usha Cooperative Society, right? Because of which DMSC was able to pull together all of the documents needed for that transfer. Whereas the other organizations which are part of the All India Network didn't have that kind of a wherewithal. So this is where the funding from GFATM didn't really materialize or didn't really come through as expected. Similarly, there were problems at the level of state funding. So if we were to take the specific case of Maharashtra here, the Department of the Women and Child Development issued a circular for supporting sex workers, and this money was to come through from the Chief Minister's Relief Fund in that case. And here, the nature of transfer was that the state would provide 5,000 rupees per month for a period of 3 months. So October, November, December of 2020. And in case of sex workers with children, they would get an additional support of rupees 2,500 per child, up to 2 children. Now, again, this scheme got scuttled during the implementation simply because the state entrusted this task of distribution to the Maharashtra State's Aid Control Society, which has its own list of organizations. And that's where a lot of the community-based organizations were completely left out of the funding. Right? And we find this quite problematic because the community-based organizations do constitute a fairly large number of sex workers. So the list which MSAX has does not really constitute the universe of sex workers in the state. Okay? And this is where then as the global and state channels of funding started failing, then we find that the NNSW sort of re-strategizes itself and reverts to functioning more as an informal network. So rather than as a national network, they revert to this informal, loosely based regional networks, which then come up and become far more proactive for supporting member organizations. Right? And herein you have certain organizations which do take the lead for this. So Sangram is one of the early founding members of the NNSW, and it has a long history of fundraising. And through the multiple rounds of COVID-19, and the table that I have provided here is only confined to the first wave of COVID-19, and there was this distribution of food and other kits by Sangram to a lot of organizations within Maharashtra. So then Sangram is the one which is raising funds, which is looking at what kind of support is needed by member organizations within the state, and it's trying to actively raise funds to support them. Similarly, you have the case of 2 other organizations, which is Sangama and CSIP. CSIP is based out of Tamil Nadu, and both of these organizations received funding from the Azim Premji Foundation and became the prime nodal organizations for supporting sex workers within these respective states. Right, and this table provides you with an understanding of the way in which Sangama went about supporting sex workers across the different districts of the state. Now, just to conclude here, now the research that I was trying to do is helps us understand a bit more about the general diversity of civil society forms here and how they have engaged with sex workers, and out of the folds of them, how do we start finding the emergence of networks or collaboratives? Now, it's quite a certainty that networks are an advancement over individual organizations because they have a far more expanded set of tools of collective action, right? And in many cases, they can draw upon individual organizational memory to build upon those tools of action, right? And secondly, they have this potential to tap into resources that individual organizations cannot. In many cases, individual organizations may not even be eligible to bid for larger funding. Right? In the context of COVID-19, as could be gathered from the discussions with members within NSW, both the successes and failures of their efforts matter here. So on the one hand, you have this very distinctive case of the funding from GFATM not exactly coming through, and that helped them realize more about the problems of compliance that they have internally. And based on that, they were trying to look at both an immediate response and a long-term response. So the long-term part of it was to convert the funding from GFATM. So as I've said before, the funding was for 10 million US dollars. They were able to utilize only 2 million. And they were trying to, and they have actually convinced GFATM to channelize the remaining $8 million for the purpose of capacity building, which will enable these individual organizations within the network to start building documentary compliance of the members that they have. And the more immediate response that that was witnessed was this case of senior organizations raising money and supporting local grassroots organizations which don't really have a long history of fundraising. Yeah, so that's about it. I hope I have not taken up too much time. Thank you.
No, this has been super. I think thanks for really a crisp overview of the paper, and everyone who is present here. I would really encourage you to go to our website or just download the paper and read it because it's a fascinating read. I think that there are couple of questions, and before going into those, I think like one question from my side, Professor Kalyan, if you're able to expand on that. I think that you made a very pertinent point on how the networks are actually an advancement when organizations come together. Probably there is a enhancement in the skills, like which is more than the sum of like just the linear sum of all of them. I wonder that given that there are different types of organizations or like small organizations or CBOs who came together for NSSW, I wonder if you also noticed like some sort of a power imbalance within the NSSW itself, and whether that actually like created either, I don't know, if a friction or if like, because one good thing that came out is that larger organizations do help the smaller ones, and that is how everything goes on. But are there power imbalances that are very apparent? And if you have seen something or can comment on that, that would be like one thing that definitely came to my mind.
Okay, so power imbalances, I mean, that's a different area of study altogether. But let me just, if we just look at the sort of genealogy here, there are some organizations which have had a long history of being part of, so they've come out of the women's movements themselves. So they have branched out of there. They have long history of theoretical understanding of where do they fit in this space. And they have experimented with different kinds of fundraising patterns. Some have worked, some have not worked out. There are also different kinds of organizational structures that exist here. So if we take the case of the Karnataka state, you have within that, there is a trade union, which for whom sex workers are a small set of informal labor that they deal with. Right? Similarly, you have non-governmental organizations like Sangram, which start off as an NGO, but they have also spawned off a whole range of other organizations. Right? So they have scaled up as to be not just an individual organization, but be this sort of set of organizations which are operating locally. So in that case, you do find that they are the ones which then end up taking the lead in terms of what should be the direction of the collective that way. Whereas a lot of the newer organizations post 2015-20, you start finding that there's an expansion within the collective. Not all of them have that kind of a history of being part of the women's movement or of the sex worker movement. And therefore, it becomes imperative for some of the senior organizations to start grooming them in that direction. And a lot of the newer organizations do tend to come in simply because there is this possibility of some kind of funding that they can that they can be part of. And that becomes the prime motive. So whereas for the older organizations, I mean, they're open to the smaller organizations getting funded through them, but they would also want them to be a bit more familiar with the kind of background from where they have emerged. Right? So far, from what I understand, so at least for the past 10 years or so, the National Network of Sex Work, it has a rotating secretariat, right? Where it moves from one organization to another, and that's where the networks remain centered for that one particular year, and it has not moved beyond these older organizations. Right? And that's because they believe that it could perhaps take the newer organization some more time to get familiarized with the terrain in itself. So, but there is that movement in that direction. So hopefully, maybe say another 10 years down the line, you could have a relatively newer organization, which does not really come from that background of targeted intervention programs, actually taking over the headship of the secretariat going forward.
Yeah, that is very insightful. Thank you. I think there are a couple of questions for you, Prof. The first one is that do we know that if the transgender sex workers are also part of the said network? And if yes, then during your study period, how have you seen their interest taken on board? Or are there like sub-organizations that represent them? Like what's the dynamic like?
Well, that's an interesting dimension on which I don't really have much of information, but some of these networks do include transgender organizations. So most of the organizations that are part of the network don't deal specifically with female sex workers. They also include transgenders. So if let me just share the screen again, and I could show you the way in which. Just a second. Yeah, so here in this table, you could have a look here. And Sangama, when it was made the nodal agency for supporting sex workers across all districts of Karnataka, and it received funding from the Azim Premji Foundation. Here you have this sort of very distinctive differentiation in terms of how was that money utilized. And here you find transgender organizations receiving some funding, and you have the female sex workers receiving the other set of it. Right, so the scope of the work that these organizations have been doing is not confined to female sex workers. They also include transgenders within that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the last question for you from the audience was that, I mean, given that the transfer of funds has been partial and there was this challenge that you mentioned, I think someone asked that whether like what would be the tangible differences that were made by the networks on the life of sex workers who are obviously the members directly or indirectly. So if you have any broad view on that.
Okay, so in what way did the network change the lives of sex workers? So firstly, we find that through the network, you have got access to funding sources which individual organizations would never have had. And this is particularly the case with smaller sex worker organizations. So at least for the past 10 years or so, we find that through the network, you have the network has supported the formation of localized collectives in tier 2, tier 3 cities across these states, across the states where they have been operational. So if I were to take the case of Maharashtra, for example, so the older networks are all located along Western Maharashtra. So you take Sangli, you take Kolhapur. That's where the older networks of Sangram and VAMP have been operational. But over the past 10 years or so, you find newer collectives getting spawned off through Sangram and VAMP in distant places like Jalgaon, Parbhani, parts of Vidarbha, parts of Marathwada, where there was absolutely no organizational structure for supporting sex workers. Right? Now, these smaller organizations which have emerged more lately do not really have a long history of fundraising. So unless they receive this funding from the relatively senior organization, which happened through the national network here or under the aegis of the national network, they would not have been able to raise any kind of funds whatsoever. And this is similarly the case with other states as well, where you have some of these older, relatively senior organizations with a long history of fundraising, going ahead, raising funds and supporting some of these smaller organizations, which don't really have that kind of a history of raising funds or don't have access to funders.
No, fascinating. I think that ends this part of our session today. And thank you, Prof, again for A, engaging with the questions and B, with such an enlightening presentation. I'll quickly wrap up. And I think again, thanks everyone who has stuck around for so long. I know it was like a really long 1.5 hour set of 2 sessions, like giving us a lot of information, and I hope that you all found it really engaging. I will actually leave all of you with 3, I would say, takeaways from my side, from what I have learned from the session that was moderated by Jinny, which is the one before this. And I think that I really like the conversation on how does a collaborative really take place, right? And I mean, we spoke about different donor-based collaborative. We spoke about different collaboratives that came together for a purpose or driven by an event, like COVID actually pushed us to make a bunch of collaboratives. But given the different ways of spawning into a collaborative, the idea that there are like obviously going to be certain set of structural patterns that that every collaborative need to have, I do think that that is a big takeaway. The second, I do think what was really interesting is the role of intermediaries. I think that people were on a spectrum to understand that whether a collaborative really needed an intermediary and like what role that intermediary plays and how strong and how efficient that intermediary need to be, given that there is always a tension between how the organizations are structured for their own individual well-being vis-a-vis actually working in a collaborative to put forth what a shared objective might be. I think that that also came out really nicely. Obviously, the interesting discussion on whether governments become a part of collaborative and whether that brings into a really a little weird dynamic into the collaborative, given how much power and how much heft a certain government agency can bring in, and what needs to be actually taken care of when you bring a government into a collaborative, and at the same time, think of them as a force multiplier and not as a unified entity. So, so great discussion on that, and thanks, Jinny, again for facilitating that. Finally, obviously, we now know more about the paper from Professor Kalyan. That was fascinating to know. We did have a lot of discussions on that part. I think apart from the paper that was discussed today, there are 3 other papers which I encourage everyone to go and check out. One is on the philanthropy and social justice movements. There is one on diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations and grant-making philanthropic landscape. And then there is another on the everyday charitable giving with urban healthcare landscapes in India. These are all 2023 cohort. We also have quite a bit of other papers from previous cohorts, so please go and check them out. From CSIP's end, I think that it's very hard to draw out a plan right now, given such rich discussions. We will take some time to go back, engage internally, and see what the next steps would be. But I do definitely think at least a strand of our work to like in the near future or maybe in the medium term to focus on collaboratives and probably like making a lot of structural knowledge available around what works and what doesn't, and maybe in the form of case studies, maybe in terms of other partnerships through which we can really make this knowledge available for everyone who is working in this sector and trying to figure out, either being from the funder perspective, whether it's a funder driven collaborative for that matter, or from the grassroots NGOs and other medium-sized NGO perspective. Again, thank you everyone. I hope this was useful for a variety of participants. This was accessible and not really up in the echelons or really an academic conference or something that is not really making sense. So we hope to continue with these sort of public consultations and presentations again and again. So yeah, you will hear from all of us. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.